side.
Okay.
Well, it's so great to be here with you. I'll tell you what, all I hear is that you guys are the most conservative people in the whole state, and the people that are supposed to be on. Can you hear me? Well, it is, as I said, great to be here. As you can tell from my Bostonian accent, I wasn't born here. I was born in Cuba. Grew up under a very oppressive military dictatorship. As a result of that, I ended up involved in a revolution as a teenager. I was in prison, was tortured, but by the grace of God, I was able to leave Cuba legally on a student visa, came to the United States in 1957. Couldn't speak any English, practically didn't have any money. I worked full-time, went to school full-time. Started as a dishwasher, and after I learned a little English, became a cook. And that's how I paid for my university. But I remember when I was in the revolution in Cuba, there was this charismatic leader that rose up, talking about hope and change. His name was Fidel Castro. And we all followed him. We thought he was going to be our liberator. Little did we know. Well, as I said, I came to the States still thinking that Castro was the solution for Cuba. 1959, in May, I went back to Cuba, and I got the shock of my life. That same man that had been talking about hope and change was now talking about how the rich were evil, about how they oppressed the poor, and about the need to redistribute the wealth. They began confiscating private property, they began shutting down newspapers, radios, televisions, began putting preachers in prison, began a very systematic attack on religion. To give you an idea, soldiers would come into a kindergarten class and would tell the kids, all right kids, close your eyes and pray to God for candy. Come on, close your eyes and pray to God for candy. Where's the candy? No candy. All right, close your eyes again and pray to Fidel for candy. And while their eyes were closed, very quietly, those soldiers would put candy on all the desks. You know, as we look around America today, we see religious persecution all around us. There is a tremendous curtailing of religious freedom in America. But you need to understand that is not the objective. That is only the means. Communism or socialism is all the same. It needs to make government your God. So in order to make government your God, they must destroy the concept of God. There can be no other loyalties except to almighty government. That's what is behind the attack on religion, is to make government your God. The other thing they would do with these kids is they would tell these kids, if you hear your parents speaking against government, it is your duty to turn them in. Then they began putting forth socialized medicine. And you hear all kinds of propaganda about how great the medical system is in Cuba. That's a bunch of lies. You go to Cuba as a guest of the government, they will tell you to these ultra-modern hospitals, which are not accessible to the Cuban people. It's just a propaganda piece. Cubans that go to the hospital have to take their own sheets, because they don't even have sheets. They don't even have aspirin. Staph infections are prevalent in those hospitals. That's the reality. To give you an idea, I was sharing this with somebody on the plane as I was coming here. The economy, of course, of Cuba totally destroyed because communism doesn't work, because nobody works. So there is rationing, food rationing in Cuba from the very beginning. To give you an idea, meat rationed to a half a pound per person per month. We eat a half a pound of meat at one sitting. That's the monthly ration. Now you still have to pay for it. Cuba before Castro had the 8th highest per capita income in the world. Today, the average salary in Cuba is about $20 a month. So, but actually, we look at the history of this country. And this country is so very, very unique. Do you realize this is the only country on the face of the earth that was founded on the Word of God? Was founded by men and women coming here seeking the freedom to worship God. Because if you lived in England and you were not a member of the Church of England, you were a heretic and you were persecuted. So these people came here with a freedom, looking for the freedom to worship God. And even those deeply religious pilgrims that landed in Plymouth, Massachusetts, they decided the first year to try a communist experiment. They basically said, look, we have all this land before us. Let us all work the land together and let us share equally in what the land produces. Sounds very romantic, doesn't it? Well, that experiment was a total failure. They almost starved to death. As a matter of fact, a bunch of them did die that first year. But they were smart enough and flexible enough that by the second year, they came to Governor Bradford and they said, Governor, this didn't work. And Governor Bradford said, all right, each of you take your own piece of land, you work the land, you feed your family. And the free enterprise system was born in America the second year of its existence. Now the question is this: if we tried it 400 years ago and it failed, why would we be dumb enough to try it again? I mean, that doesn't make any sense at all. But that's where we are today. But let's move 200 years forward to the time of the framers. And I'm a student of American history, especially the history of the framers. These were deeply committed men of God. One of the lies that the Obama administration is trying to propagate is that the Constitution is a secular document, that these framers were a bunch of secularists. Nothing could be further from the truth. Do you know that 29 of the 56 signers of the Declaration were seminary graduates? As a matter of fact, look at the Declaration of Independence. 17 grievances against King George in the Declaration of Independence. Did you know that each and every one of those grievances were preached from the pulpits of America before they were written on the Declaration? It was preachers from the pulpit calling out King George for the atrocities that the British were perpetrating upon the American people. And I'll tell you, when I look at what those framers did, they really committed everything they had to give us this great constitutional representative republic that we have today. They laid it all on the line. You know, we see what's been happening in America, not just in the last 6 years. Actually, the real decline in America started in 1962. Started in 1962 when the Supreme Court decided that prayer would be banned from school. And then a year later, in 1963, they banned the reading of the Bible from school. Two abominable decisions, back to back, 62 and 63. Do you realize that the very first Bible that was printed in America was printed under the auspices of Congress to become the principal textbook in primary schools, high schools, and universities? So 150 years later, almost 200 years later, Supreme Court decided that the Bible could no longer be taught in school. You know the reasoning they used? They used an article from a psychologist that said that if children read the Bible without a parent explaining it to them, it could cause brain damage. And look, they banned the Bible. So they banned prayer in 62, they banned the Bible in 63. Look at the statistics. After 1963, teen pregnancy skyrocketed, as did violent crime. As a matter of fact, we spent billions and billions of dollars, maybe trillions, fighting crime. And it was as a result of removing prayer and Bible study from schools. Now, I'll tell you what, we see the battles keep getting worse and worse and worse. But you know why? Because we have strayed from what those framers did. You know, I was sharing something this afternoon that it bears repeating. For millennia, the model for government has always been the same. This is a man-made model. And the model is authority flows from God to the government to the people. I repeat, this is not God's model, it's man's model. Authority flows from God to the government to the people. Even in the Old Testament. If you read in 1 Samuel chapter 8, the people of Israel came to the prophet Samuel demanding, we want a king just like all the nations around us have a king. And actually God said to Samuel, Samuel, they're not rejecting you, they're rejecting me. See, before that, the people of Israel were being governed by judges that arose from among the people. But now they place themselves in that same man-made model. Authority flows from God to the government to the people. And kings and tyrants throughout history have used that model to justify their oppression of the people. I can oppress you because I get my authority from God. But the framers, when they were on their knees, and I believe the reason the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution of the United States of America have lasted over 2 centuries is because they were forged on the knees of the framers. These were men of God seeking revelation from above. And that's what they got. And God gave them a totally different model for government. No longer authority flows from God to the government to the people, but rather authority flows from God to the people to the government. Understand the difference? Not from God to the government to the people, but from God to the people to the government. All authority under the Constitution is placed upon we the people. And with that comes an awesome responsibility for us to elect righteous leaders. I'll tell you what, did you know that the Bible tells you exactly who to vote for? The Bible tells you exactly who to vote for. Let me put it in context. Moses has just crossed the Red Sea. And now Moses is in the wilderness and he's trying to govern 1 million people. And Moses is going bananas. Here comes his father-in-law, Jethro. And he says, Moses, what you're doing is not good. And in Exodus chapter 18, verse 21, God speaks to Moses through Jethro. And he says, you select from among the people. Now note, God doesn't say, I will appoint. No. You select, which is the same as you elect. You select from among the people, and then he gives 4 qualifications. Able men, such as fear God, men of truth, hating covetousness. Able men, such as fear God, men of truth, hating covetousness. Let's define those terms. Number 1, able men and women, of course. What does that mean? That means elect men and women that are capable of doing the job. Let's stop electing the village idiot. Number 2, such as fear God. What does that mean? Well, if you fear God, you obey God's precepts. We call that in America a Judeo-Christian ethic. What is a Judeo-Christian ethic? Well, first of all, it's a moral code of conduct. And then it's honesty, integrity, hard work, individual responsibility, the rule of law, and yes, limited government and free enterprise. The Bible has a lot to say about all of those. So able men, such as fear God. Number 3, men of truth. Let me ask you a question. Aren't you sick and tired of men and women of lies in government? I mean, whether it is Fast and Furious, or Benghazi, or the IRS, or the NSA, or Ebola, or the missing emails, or the millions coming from foreign governments, it's lies upon lies upon lies. As a matter of fact, they tell you one lie to cover up the previous lie. Let me ask you another question. Have you ever come across a candidate for public office that will tell you all these wonderful things they're going to do, only to get elected and do exactly the opposite? Anybody had that experience? But I'll tell you, that one is easy to fix. Just remember this. Stop listening to their rhetoric and start looking at their record. They all have a record. Stop listening to what they say. Start looking to what they do. Jesus put it this way. Ye shall know them by their fruit. It's about time we do some fruit checking. Able men, such as fear God, men of truth. Number 4, hating covetousness. Now I'll tell you a secret about covetousness. Covetousness in government is not primarily about money. It is about power and control. Politicians covet power, and they covet the control that that power gives them over we the people. That's why we have politicians in Washington that have been there for 30 years, and they want to be there another 20. They've forgotten who they serve. As a matter of fact, most of those people think that we work for them, but the reality is they work for us, and we need to remind them of that. They work for us. They're supposed to be our servants. Go back to the Constitution. Where does all authority in the Constitution lay? With we the people. So we need to exert that responsibility, and those people that are not living up to the responsibility that's given unto them, what we need to do is throw them out of office. But you know, the problem is we get too complacent. We get too complacent. We get apathetic. Well, you know, whatever will be, will be. Let me tell you, we can't do that anymore. This country is on the edge of a precipice. Let me just say something that I believe with every fiber of my being. If Hillary Clinton gets elected in 2016, this country is gone. This country cannot sustain another 4 or 8 years of what we had in the last 6. It'll destroy this country. So, I'll tell you what. We cannot sit this one out. If we do not turn this country back to what those framers intended, I don't know that we can do it if we don't do it now. You know, as I told you, I saw communism firsthand, and I was so glad to get back to America and come to that land of the free and the home of the brave. I'm so proud to be an American. I'll tell you what, this is the greatest country on the face of the earth. But then, you know, I got to the late 70s, and I was shocked again when I saw what was happening in this country in the late 70s. Some of you may remember the Carter years. 22% interest rates, 18% inflation, double-digit unemployment, lines around the block to get gasoline, a government so weak in foreign policy that Iran had captured 82 Americans and held them hostage for 444 days. You know, it's not coincidental that those hostages were released the day President Reagan was inaugurated. Because they knew President Reagan was not going to play any games with it. And you know, do you know who President Reagan appointed to welcome the hostages? Jimmy Carter. Now, isn't that poetic justice? The guy who caused the thing in the first place. But anyway, as a result of the Carter years, I became very involved in Republican politics. I was part of a group that mobilized millions of Christians and people of faith around this country to help elect whom I consider the greatest president of the last 150 years, President Ronald Reagan. And I remember when my son was 9 years old, all through 1980, our conversation around the dinner table centered on why we had to get rid of this leftist, progressive socialist called Jimmy Carter and replace him with a constitutional conservative like Ronald Reagan. I mean, my son got a dose of conservative politics for a whole year when he was 9 years old. And I'll tell you another story about my son because I think this shows who he is. When he was entering high school, through a client of mine, we got him introduced to a man by the name of Roland Story. Roland Story was the president of an organization called the Free Enterprise Institute. So now Ted is entering high school. He's reading Adam Smith, he's reading Locke, he's reading von Mises, Hayek, Bastiat, Montesquieu, Milton Friedman, the Federalist Papers, the Anti-Federalist Papers. And then this organization creates a group of 5 kids. They call them the Constitutional Corroborators. That was one of those 5. They hired a memory expert and taught those 5 kids to memorize the U.S. Constitution. And for the following 4 years, they would go to Rotary clubs around the state of Texas. They would put 5 easels in front of the room, and while people were having lunch, these kids would write the Constitution by memory on those easels, and then give a half-hour patriotic speech on free market economics and the Constitution. During those next 4 years, they did approximately 80 speeches on free market economics and the Constitution. Before my son left high school, he was passionate about the Constitution. He was passionate about the Declaration, about free markets, about limited government, about free enterprise, about the rule of law. And that passion became like fire in his bones. And the reason I know that my son Ted will not compromise his principles is that that fire is as alive today as it was 30 years ago. I'll tell you, we need men and women to lead this country that have that fire for the Constitution, for the rule of law, for preserving the greatness of America and restoring that greatness. You know, the second paragraph of the preamble, and I'm going to quit in about 5 minutes. Second paragraph of the preamble tells us, we hold these truths to be self-evident. But the problem to many of those people in Washington is not very self-evident to them. That all men are created equal. Well, again, the problem with the same people is that some are more equal than others. We saw it with Solyndra. We saw it with General Motors. We see it more than anything else with Obamacare. Here's a law that nobody wanted, that Nancy Pelosi said we got to pass it before we read it. Now, after they passed it, the Dems read it, and guess what? They didn't like it. So Harry Reid went running to Obama and said, we want an exemption for it. Did you know that Congress is exempt from Obamacare? No, they have their own. That's why my son refused to accept the Cadillac plan they have for Congress. He said, no. If the American people have to be under Obamacare, if I can't find anything else, I'd rather go on Obamacare than take the thing that you carved out just for Congress. Then, big business who finances the campaigns of Obama, they said, we want an exemption. The IRS, who are the enforcers for Obamacare, they said, we want an exemption. The labor unions who provide the foot soldiers for the community organizers for the campaigns of this administration, they said, we want an exemption. Well, what about we the people? You know, that's what that 22-hour filibuster by my son was all about, was about fighting for the rights of we the people. But the declaration continues, that they are endowed, and what are the next three words? By their Creator. Three words that this administration has tried always to skip. That they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. You see, the only thing that makes those rights unalienable is if they come from God. Because if they come from government, government can take them away. And then it says, among which are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and they are in order of importance. And of course, the most important is life. Because if you don't have life, you're dead, and then you can't pursue anything else. So life is the most important. Well, life is under attack from the cradle to the grave. Since 1973, when 9 unelected justices of the Supreme Court decided that a baby in the womb did not have that unalienable right to life, as stated in the Declaration of Independence, and they legalized abortion. Since then, 58 million babies have been murdered in America through abortion. At the other end, it's no better. With Obamacare, like it happens with socialized medicine in Canada, in England, the elderly in those countries, it takes 12 to 18 months to get any kind of medical procedure. What makes you think it's not going to happen in America? It's already happening in America. We've seen veterans die because of denied care by the VA hospitals. Men and women that lay their lives on the line to protect our freedom. That's a travesty. That's criminal. And in between, our quality of life is eroded by taxation and regulation. I'll tell you what, we need to get rid of the IRS, we need to get rid of the NSA, we need to get rid of the Endangered Species Act. Taxation and regulation are destroying the economy of this country. Before I get off life, you know, maybe I'm going to shock you. Do you know that we do not get the right to keep and bear arms from the Second Amendment? I'm going to repeat it. We do not get the right to keep and bear arms from the Second Amendment. Let's see what it says. The right to keep and bear arms shall not what? Be infringed upon. The Second Amendment assumes you already have that right, because that right is intrinsic in that unalienable right to life. You see, if you have an unalienable right to life, you also have the right to protect that life and protect the life of your loved ones. So the attack on the Second Amendment ultimately goes to the unalienable right to life. Life, liberty, all liberties are under attack. I mean, more and more and more you see the government curtailing our freedom. From even the light bulbs that you buy, or the toilet seat that you buy, to right now, what's about to happen in the next 2 or 3 days at the Supreme Court, next Tuesday, the 28th. They're fixing to sit down and decide whether homosexual marriage is a right. And let me tell you, this is not about homosexual marriage. It is about religious freedom. Because if the court rules that homosexual marriage is a right, mark my words, the next thing is going to be come to a church and saying you must perform a homosexual marriage or we're going to put you in jail. Or you must hire a homosexual pastor and we'll put you in jail. This thing is not about homosexual couples. You know, civil unions have been legal for a long time. Has nothing to do with homosexuals living together. It has to do with religious. This is an attack on religious liberty. So, and of course, if you don't have liberty, you're a slave, and if you're a slave, you cannot pursue happiness. The next sentence in the preamble says that to protect those rights, or to preserve those rights, governments are instituted, not to trample upon those rights like the government is doing today. Then the next sentence says that government derives in this just powers by the consent of the governed. Who are the governed? We are. Did we give them the consent to cram Obamacare down our throats? Did we give them the consent to cram Common Core down our throats? Did we give the NSA the consent to listen to our phone conversation and read our texts and read our emails? Did we give the IRS the consent to target pro-life organizations, patriotic organizations? No. Well, it's about time we say we're not going to take it anymore. And the next sentence in the preamble gives us a solution. And it says, when government ceases to work towards these ends, it is our right, and I believe it is our duty, to remove that government and replace it with another government. That's where we are today. We do that through the ballot box. We need to coalesce and make sure we have a strong constitutional conservative at the head of this government. Make sure that we turn back from this cliff in which we're falling. Let me tell you, it's not too late for America, but we don't have much time. We must turn America around in 2016. America is worth saving. I want to finish with the last few words of the Declaration, where those patriots said, relying upon the protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. I already told you how our life is under attack from the cradle to the grave. Our fortunes? Let me tell you, the Obama administration has both hands in your pocket, trying to take every hard-earned dollar you make to give it out in handouts, to buy votes. But I'll tell you something. They can take our lives. They can take our fortune. But no one can take our honor. No one can take our honor. Tell you what, we're going to do some Q&A, but before we do that, I want us to make a covenant. Make a covenant to one another before God. I would like for us to stand, please. I'm going to repeat this covenant that the framers made, and I want you to repeat it one sentence at a time after me, from the heart before God, relying upon the protection of divine providence. We mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor to do all we can to restore righteousness to America. To do all we can to restore limited government and the rule of law. To make America again that shining city on a hill. So help me God. Thank you. God bless you. God bless America. God bless South Carolina.
We got some questions if you got a couple more
Okay.
minutes.
Okay. They have.
Is he going to read the question?
All right. I got 2 or 3 questions here. One. What is the solution to keep Social Security viable going decades into the future? Well, this is a question that my son has answered at length. And I would say first of all, we need to realize Social Security, if we don't do something about it, it will go bankrupt. It will go bankrupt because that safety deposit box is empty. The government has used that money. But what do? Let me say this. When Social Security was instituted, you know what the average age, death age was? 62 years old. It was an ambition for people to live 20 years on Social Security. So one of the things we need to do is we need to start increasing the retirement age from 65 on. Maybe like 6 months every year or so, just increase it a little bit at a time. Not for people currently on Social Security, not for people that are in the last few years, but say for people 40 and under. If we don't do something, that system is not going to be there for them anyway. We have to start slowly increasing the retirement age. Secondly, one thing that would work tremendously is open the door for private savings accounts. For you to be able to take at least a percentage of your Social Security and put it into an account that you owned, and that when you die, you can bequeath as an inheritance to your children and your children's children. Let me tell you, then you control your money, you control where that money is invested, and as I say, that is your money, that is not the government's, it's yours. You can pass it on to your children. If we do those two things, Social Security will be on a very solid ground. Let me tell you, it's very interesting. Chile, South America, when Pinochet was a dictator, but there was one very good thing that he did. He hired the Milton Friedman School of Economics in Chicago to go to Chile and help them set up their economic system. Chile today has one of the best economies in Latin America, and they have a Social Security system superior to ours because they instituted savings accounts there, and tax-free. You don't put it into social, you put it into your own account for retirement, and it's totally solvent. So we know the system worked. They applied it using Milton Friedman's idea out of the Chicago School of Economics. So if we do that, savings accounts and slowly increase, not for people that are near retirement. For people that are near retirement, you don't do anything. Remember, we need to honor the fact that that is your money. It's not the government's money. You put it in, and presumably the government was going to be keeping it for you. Well, guess what? They got their hands in the tail, and they used it. Number two, what would you say is the number one character trait your son possesses that you think will be his best trait to possess in helping him lead this nation in the right direction? And what do you think will be his first priority to correct that Obama has caused? Well, let me take it one step. There are two questions there. First question, what do I think is the greatest trait my son has? Very simply, he'll do what he says he's going to do. Truth. Truth. I am sick and tired of politicians that will just test the wind. We saw it in Iowa. You know, a couple of months ago there was an agricultural summit in Iowa. We saw all these candidates come to the agricultural summit. You got to realize Iowa is the biggest ethanol producer in America. We saw all these candidates go to the agricultural summit and all praise the ethanol subsidies. Every one of them speaking about how great the ethanol subsidies, and of course that they were in favor of the ethanol subsidies. Some of those candidates have spoken against the subsidies just a couple of months before. When it came time for my son to speak, he started by saying, well, I would imagine you will also want me to say that I'm in favor of the ethanol subsidies, but I'm going to disappoint you. I'm not only against the ethanol subsidies, I think they are corporate welfare, but I am submitting a bill to get rid of ethanol subsidies. You know what? He got a standing ovation. He got a standing ovation. We need to have politicians that stand on their word. You remember when a contract was a handshake? And I mean, you wouldn't violate that. Today, you can't believe what people tell you. I mean, they talk out of both sides of their mouth. And they'll go to one state and say something, they go to another state and say the opposite. We need to hold them accountable for what they say. So I would say honesty and integrity. I would say that's the number one character trait. Now, the second question is, what would he do first? Well, I think one of the things that I'm going to put two of them together. One of them is get rid of every word of Obamacare. But right along that is this. Get rid of all these executive actions, executive orders that he unconstitutionally has done. And you know something that is very interesting? All those executive orders that Obama, with a pen and a phone, has done can be rescinded day one. Yes. Can be rescinded day one. Now, right behind that, we got to cut the wings of the EPA. The EPA is coming out with thousands upon thousands of new regulations every month. You got to realize, you got all these bureaucrats working at the EPA, and what is their job? Create new regulations. If they don't create new regulations, they don't have a job. And I'll tell you what, the EPA and the Endangered Species Act are the two things that are destroying more jobs in America. Today, they even want to regulate the dust in a farm and the amount of water that you use and who knows what else. We need to just put a stop to all those regulations that are thwarting the economy. And you know, right along with that, we need to realize the following. Government cannot create jobs. What government needs to do is get out of the way and provide the environment for the private sector to provide the jobs. How do you do that? You do that, get rid of regulations, and the second thing is you get rid of taxation. Go back to Reagan. When Reagan took office, he cut down the top marginal rate from 72%, I think it was, to 28%. I mean, by 2/3. On the 5th year of Reagan, GDP was growing at 7.2% a year. 8 million jobs have been created in the private sector. The only jobs that are being created today outside of Texas, where we get a lot of, and North Dakota, where the oil industry boom has created a lot of jobs. The only jobs that the Obama administration has created are civil servant jobs. And we got too many of those. So we need to curtail regulations. We need to get rid of this tax rate that is destroying this country. Do you realize we have the highest corporate rate in the world? There's no country in the world. It used to be that Japan was higher than ours. Not any longer. They lowered theirs. We have the highest corporate rate in America, in the world. And then we got all these taxes that are really immoral, like the inheritance tax. That's money you pay taxes to. You pay taxes to that money. Now you die and your heirs, in order to inherit what you work all your life for, they got to pay taxes. I mean, if they don't have the money, they lose whatever assets they have in order to pay the taxes. What my son has proposed is basically a two-stage proposal. Ideally, you would want a fair tax, where it's a tax on consumption. If you don't consume, you don't pay taxes. You pay taxes on consumption. But let me tell you one thing before you get too excited about doing the fair tax. A tax on consumption only works if you get rid of the IRS first. Because otherwise, look at England, look at Mexico. They have a value-added tax, but they also have an income tax. If we do a fair tax or a value-added tax without eliminating the IRS, they will just add it on top of the income tax. So you must totally eliminate the IRS for a fair tax to work. So that's a great goal, but without eliminating the IRS, it's foolish because they'll just add it to the tax rate we got. So what my son is proposing as a first step is a flat tax. Uniform flat tax as low as possible. Of course, you'll have some deductions, personal deductions, that someone that is in poverty will pay less because they have the personal deduction of husband and wife or whatever. But everybody pays the same thing. Everybody's got skin in the game. And then you can get rid of all this bureaucracy in the IRS. As a matter of fact, the way my son talks about a flat tax is a tax that you can fill out in a 3x5 card. Was there any other question here? Let's see. I think there was one more. In your opinion, who has been the best president in your lifetime? No question. Ronald Reagan. There's not even a close second. As a matter of fact, did you hear about this study that was done at this great university that came with the conclusion that Obama was the 5th best president in the United States? Said there were 3 tied for number 1, and it was Reagan, Washington, and Lincoln. There were 17 tied for number 2. There were 22 tied for number 3. Jimmy Carter was number 4, and Obama was number 5. Any other questions? Anybody that would just, yes, sir.
I'm not trying to be cute, but when your son's elected president, that's going to leave a Senate seat open in Texas. What about you?
Don't you think?
I've heard a lot of politicians talking.
Let me ask you something. Don't you think we've had enough dynasties? You think we need another dynasty? I think we had enough dynasties. There was a hand over here.
Yeah, I was just thinking, my biggest fear of this next election is the same voter fraud that we had in 2008 and 2000.
All right, let me answer your question this way. Let's assume there is voter fraud. And let's assume the voter fraud, let's be outrageous, is 5%. What do? We win by 7%. So how do we overcome voter fraud? Grassroots. Grassroots, grassroots. Let's turn out millions of people who've never gone to the polls to go out and vote. That's how we overcome voter fraud. Yeah, I'll tell you what, there are more of us than there are of them. But the us need to get to the polls. And the us need to vote for candidates that uphold the principles that have made America great. So if we turn out the grassroots, we will win every office from dog catcher all the way to the presidency. But it's up to us. It's up to us. So that means what happens inside this room is unimportant. What's important is what you're going to do when you walk out that door. So we need to take this message to the masses and get those people to get involved. Thank you. God bless you. Thank you.
Michelle's got, we appreciate that, it's great. I knew it would be inspirational. I've heard some of it before, but it sounds good the second time too, so thank you. Michelle's got something for you, and we appreciate you coming to Pickens. Michelle, you got it, whatever you want to do.
All right,
I'm
all
done.
right. We have a little something here from you.
Well, thank you.
From Pickens County. I have to explain it because it's kind of a strange looking thing.
Is that something to spank my son if he's straight? It'll work, eh? A paddle. So now you better toe the line, man. Boy, you better toe the line.
All right.
I'll tell him.
It's from Pickens County. All right, well, we'd like to thank you for coming here tonight and reigniting us for freedom and liberty here.
Thank you.
Yep, so everybody in this hat, I have a few items here, some tokens of appreciation. So, first we're gonna start with these. We know you have much hard work ahead to plant the seeds
Okay.
for returning America to the biblical, constitutional, and historical foundations. So, with this, everybody's wondering how this is gonna fit in.
Yep, back scratch.
It's not a spanker, but it could be. When you get the itch to quit, remember Pickens County, South Carolina, the most conservative county in South Carolina.
I hope you didn't say it's for somebody else to scratch my back.
All right, the pinwheel. Sometimes, no matter who we are, even the strong in faith, we can feel like all we are doing is spinning our wheels. Remember and know that others support you.
Yes.
You know something, I gotta say something there. When I was first out of college, in my office, I had a little sign that said, "Blessed are those who go around in circles, for they shall be called the big wheels."
Finally, you have our heart,
Well, thank you. Praise God.
and we tip our hats to you.
Amen.
Yes.